Hey, what's up you guys? This is episode 2 on my series on LGBT Classics. This video will cover 4 books from the 1900s and 1910s that are notable for their LGBT themes and characters. If you enjoy this video, definitely subscribe so that you do not miss out on any future videos, and please leave a like as well, and obviously comment any thoughts that you have on these books in the comments down below. I thought all 4 of these books were really interesting. I really liked 3 of them. One of them I could probably go without, but obviously stick around and you will hear my proper thoughts on them. And without any further ado, let's just get started talking about the very first book. The first book I'm going to talk about is The Immoralist by Imre, which was published in 1902. He was a French writer who was actually a friend of Oscar Wilde's, and from what I've read online, this book didn't really make much of an impression when it was first published. However, it gained a little bit of a cult following throughout the years and is now regarded as a modern classic. This book follows Michael, who, while travelling abroad with his wife in North Africa, falls ill and there discovers that he has an attraction to young teenage boys. This book left me a little bit confused and, to be honest, quite disappointed, because despite the title and what you would expect from the description, you know, him developing an attraction to young teenage boys, I was expecting Michael to descend into some deep, twisted, immoral, behaviours and do some dark, twisted things. However, despite him developing an attraction to these young teenage boys, which at the time were of legal age, however, obviously now in a contemporary lens, looking back, we can judge the morality of that differently, and it would obviously now not be acceptable. I think that this book was just disappointing because nothing really comes from it. Yes, he develops this attraction and talks about it in his head and thinks about it, but he doesn't act on it, and nothing really comes of it in the physical sense, which I thought was interesting because I was really expecting him to, act out and abandon his wife and, go down this dark, twisted path, but he doesn't really go there. The gay and I would say the predatory aspect of the book is very subdued, and like I said, nothing really comes from it. From what I read online about this book, I was really expecting it to get quite explicit, for example, but nothing really happens. Although, even taking the lack of action into consideration, I would say that this has quite poor representation for, gay men, because there is a stereotype that gay men are predators, and the attraction to young teenage boys being what he develops is not like men of his own age, it is young boys, is obviously quite harmful and not something that you really want to promote. So, although I knew this would be the case going in, I was still hoping to be entertained and, a little bit shocked by the contents of the book. I ended up just leaving this book disappointed and a little bit bored, to be honest. There were some interesting philosophical conversations that happened, and it is kind of interesting in that sense, but to be honest, it did not live up to expectations and I would not recommend this book. Imre, a Memorandum, was published in a limited run of 500 copies by Edward Prime-Stevenson in 1906, and it is noteworthy as some believe it to be the first gay novel by an American author with a happy ending for the characters. It is a very short but beautifully written book. The actual story itself, in my edition, was only about 100-ish pages, but this did not impact the story at all. It was so beautifully written. Although it is quite a simple story, what really takes it to the next level is the way that it is so intelligently crafted. The author cites historical figures going back as far as ancient Greece and Rome. He cites art and literature and contemporary medical and scientific opinions on homosexuality from the time. And the footnotes that my edition came with explained all these so perfectly well and really just brought it to the next level for me in terms of enjoyment. I was so impressed by it. What I also loved was that it was just so perfectly blended together. All of these more intelligent aspects were blended perfectly with the dialogue between the 2 characters, and it just flowed so nicely and so naturally, which I was so impressed by. And in terms of whether this is, good or bad representation, I would definitely say this is on the upper end of the scale. I thought this was really beautifully crafted, and the characters are sympathetic, relatable and morally sound. So what I also learned from this novel, which is really interesting, was the term Uranian, which was a term used in the 19th century for gay men, and it has a really interesting etymology. I don't know if I pronounced that right, and it's definitely worth reading about. I will link in the description the Wikipedia page for Uranian, and it is so interesting. I never came across this term before until this book, and it's definitely worth researching for some obscure historical LGBT terminology, because I was really fascinated by it. I also discovered through this a genre of poetry from the 19th century called Uranian poetry, which I think I will cover in a future episode in this series, because I am just really fascinated by this very unknown section of, gay terminology, but that was also literature. Like, Uranian poetry was something so obscure that I don't think many people know about, so I think it would be quite interesting to explore. So I would definitely recommend this book, specifically the Broadview Literary Text Edition, which is what I had. It has a great introduction, it has really detailed footnotes, like all of that more intellectual stuff that I talked about. The footnotes explain everything like so perfectly, like who all the historical people are, like what the art means and the symbolism of it, the literature, the scientific and medical stuff. It explains everything so well, and it is so detailed. And then the appendix is really extensive. It goes into a lot of detail on the author's life and the contemporary society opinions on homosexuality, which give you like such a full scope of understanding about the way that this book was written and what was going through the author's mind and stuff like that. So it was very fascinating, and I would highly recommend it. I think this was a great book. Maurice by E.M. Forster was written between 1913 and 1914, and then revised in 1932, and then later revised again in 1953, but it was actually never published until after the author's death in 1970. The book was eventually published in 1971, so I was not completely sure where to put this book within this series. However, after reading it, it definitely belongs in this section. It was written in the 1910s, and it really reflects society in the 1900s and 1910s, so that is why it is in this video, although the dates of like when it was revised and everything obviously span a whole decade. Forster didn't want to publish this book while he was still alive due to the legal and societal attitudes towards homosexuality at the time. He was worried that he would be prosecuted for publishing it, and it is also noteworthy for its happy ending, very similar to Imre. The main characters have a happy ending at the end, which was still unusual for the time. So I enjoyed Maurice quite a lot. It's a love story, I would say. It is a love story, but it has some twists and some turns, and I don't really want to go into the plot because it is quite a simple plot, but I just enjoyed it a lot because of the characters, I would say. Maurice himself, the titular character, comes off quite unlikable at times, but this was Forster's intention. He definitely sets him up to be not the nicest of characters, and the way that his internal struggles with his sexuality result in him lashing out at people and treating people badly is sadly, unfortunately accurate. I think a lot of people can relate to that. And I really liked how Forster made Maurice sympathetic, but then also a little bit unlikable. He was a very layered character, which I really liked. One of the most noteworthy parts of this novel to me is Maurice's experiences with doctors and just the medical field in general when it comes to his sexuality. So he seeks help from two different doctors, one of which won't even speak about it after Maurice describes himself to be an unspeakable of the Oscar Wilde sort, which I really thought that was an interesting way to put it. And then another who believes that hypnotism is the way to cure homosexuality. And then later on, there is another character who believes that by marrying a woman, he's cured himself of his homosexuality, and that he states that marriage, fresh air, and friendship is enough to cure it. So all of these things were really interesting to me. I think it really just shows how medical opinions have progressed since, this was over 100 years ago, so you would hope they'd progressed, but it just really shows like how different things are, and I think it really makes you appreciate how far we have come in terms of medical understanding of these types of things. This novel also explores how blackmail and the threat of exposure were used to control gay men, and obviously if he was outed at this time, his life would be ruined, and he would also probably or potentially end up in prison. So I really enjoyed this novel. The writing itself was also exquisite. I really want to read some more books by E.M. Forster, which I own, A Passage to India and Howard's End, so I'm excited to read them at some point in the future, and I would definitely recommend this book. It was really easy to read, and it gave me a lot to think about. Despised and Rejected by Rose Alatini was published in 1918, right at the end of the First World War, and it follows a gay man and a bisexual woman who attempt to fall in love, and they are also conscientious objectors of the First World War. It was banned because of these themes, and the publisher was prosecuted because of the themes in this book. I love the parallels that were made between how society viewed gay people at the time and also how it viewed conscientious objectors. They were told that they were wrong, they were shamed and shunned from society. Having our main male character be both gay and a conscientious objector really highlighted these themes in a really interesting way. The book showed that those who refused to fight in the war were not cowards and were in fact very brave in their own way. Not everyone could handle being shunned from society, being disowned by their family, going to prison, and also, being tortured in prison. And the descriptions of what happened to conscientious objectors in prisons in this book were so disturbing, to be honest, and I feel like I truly learned some historical knowledge from this book. It really made me appreciate those people who stood up for their beliefs in the First World War and, future wars as well, by being conscientious objectors even more. It's something that I've thought a lot about in the past because I would call myself a pacifist, but when it comes to actually, standing up for what you believe in when everyone else in society is turning against you, it's like hard to say if you would be brave enough to do so. And it really highlighted that these people were not cowards and they were brave in standing by their convictions. The sexuality of these characters outside of their relationships with each other, so it's a gay man and a bisexual woman, and they are attempting to fall in love to kind of cure themselves, kind of similar to, the friend in Maurice who says that marriage can cure homosexuality. These characters are kind of grappling with that, but the sexuality was never really explored on a psychological level, and I actually liked that. I liked that it was a little bit of a secondary focus, and I would say that it does make up like 50-50, like the conscientious objector stuff and the sexuality stuff. It has like quite an even, amount of description, but I think that it really highlighted how multi-layered characters can be, and that characters don't have to be, just gay or just lesbians or just bisexual, and there can be a lot to them. I say that Dennis, the main male character, is number 1 a musician, number 2 a conscientious objector, and number 3 a gay man. And I just liked how layered this was, and I really enjoyed his character. He stood by his own opinions and his own thoughts on the war. He argued with his friends and his family. His father wrote him off, and he didn't care if he became despised and rejected, which is the title of the book, because he was standing by what he thought was right. And I really loved it. I love this book in general. I think that this could potentially make it onto my top 10 list of 2021. I was so impressed by it. The writing as well is really beautifully written. It's pretty much what you would expect from a classic from the time period, but like a well-written classic from the time period. I just really enjoyed it, and I hope that a lot of people will check this out. Sadly, it is a little bit hard to get your hands on a copy of this. I managed to find one quite cheap that is quite beat up, but other editions are quite expensive, which is a shame. I hope that this gets republished at some point in a more accessible format, because I think this is a really interesting book. And, I hadn't read anything about conscientious objectors before. I learned quite a lot from this book in terms of the sexuality stuff, then also just in terms of the pacifist stuff and everything. And I just loved it. I hope you can tell, I really did enjoy this book, and I would highly recommend it. I think it was really great. So those were the 4 LGBT classics that I read from the 1900s and 1910s. If you have any thoughts on these books, let me know down below. I really enjoyed, obviously Despised and Rejected was my number 1. Imre was beautifully written as well. It was so intellectually crafted. I just loved it. And then Maurice as well just gave me a lot to think about and was just like a really well written story. The Immoralist as well, it was interesting. I'm glad I read it, but I would say that out of the 4 is definitely the worst. And in terms of, being good representation for LGBT characters, it is definitely the worst. And the author as well, I didn't really go into it because it's quite dark, but he's suspicious. Okay, I'll leave it at that. You can do your own research if you want. Personally, I don't think that he is maybe that nice of a person. I don't know. But I will leave you to look it up if you wish. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and please subscribe. I'm really excited to do the next video. I think that the next one is just going to be on the 1920s on its own, because I have quite a few books I want to talk about. So please subscribe to see that in the future, hopefully by the end of this month. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, and I will see you in my next one.